Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. We're going to explore the topic of money for the next half hour. Our guest is Michael Phillips, an economist and author of The 7 Laws of Money, Honest Business, and Simple Living Investments for Old Age. Infinity, as those of you who are regulars know, is an unusual program, and you may wonder why money is an appropriate topic for this exploration. Money, however, is a major issue in everyone's life, whether you're an inner-directed person or not. Michael, the first question is it possible to be an inner-directed person and be financially secure?
I probably would say there's not much connection between whether you're inner-directed or other-directed and any financial issues at all. I know all kinds of people on all sides of the spectrum. It's not a dimension that correlates. But I think what you're driving at is whether it's a hindrance, whether aggressive or outgoing people may find it easier to support themselves. And I don't think there's a lot of evidence to support that idea. Based on my experience of 20 years in business and finance.
Isn't that part of the traditional American stereotype, though, that this real hard-driving, aggressive individual is the one who's really going to go out there and be the Horatio Alger of the society and pull himself or herself up by the bootstraps?
It's built into every element of our thinking and our history. And it's unfortunate more for the person who accepts that value than for the person who rejects it. Because the person who accepts it probably accepts a lot of the other values that go along with that. And only a few people really are comfortable in that role of being highly aggressive and outgoing. I do know some highly aggressive, inner-directed people as well. But in terms of ability to function in the society, it doesn't seem to be particularly helpful. There's just as many forces that work against you as soon as you're visibly outgoing. In fact, most of my experience is that outgoing people may do fairly well in their, say, age 25 to 35 age period, but they better overlay that with an awful lot of skills and temper their aggressiveness with a lot of patience and understanding and listening skills. By the time they're 35, the society's no longer willing to tolerate brazen aggressiveness in most cases.
What about the flip side of the equation, those individuals who are very spiritual, inner-directed, involved in following one or other spiritual pursuit, who would suggest that money is a hindrance to their spiritual development, that money is a bad thing, that people, I guess most people who think that money is a real hindrance don't have much of it, and then you always hear the stories of the people who have whole bundles of money and are very unhappy. They have not found any happiness, even though they've found tremendous earthly wealth.
Well, since I get almost no people coming to me who are highly aggressive and talking about money, because part of their being aggressive is an absolute inability to even discuss the subject of their own problems. But I do get quite a few people who are quiet, let's say, and who are comfortable saying that they have problems with money or planning or knowing who they are. I know a little more about the people who in the second category. And I do often hear statements as outrageous as, well, I'm doing everything I can on the spiritual plane or some other plane, and I'm going to let the money part take care of itself, which is, from my perspective, analogous to saying, I'm going to change my clothes every once in a while, but as far as taking a shower goes, maybe when I'm near one, I'll try and find out how to use it. There's the connection just isn't there. It's not logical. The most religious practices that I know of focus enormous amount of attention on very tangible things like breathing, posture, speaking, what you say to people, how you talk about things in the world. and how you treat other people. And so most of the practices and disciplines that I'm aware of focus enormous amount of the disciple or the student's energy on very highly tangible and real things. And surprisingly, I would say the same thing is true about money. That for the same reason you can't make much progress on the spiritual path if you are trooping along with big heavy boots and carrying a big bag on your back and you're stoned. I mean, you're really not paying attention to where you're going or what you're doing. The same kind of disciplines that are needed in spiritual training are needed in dealing with life in order to make the issues of money and finance work effectively. To put it bluntly, you have to pay just as much attention to your checking account and balance it every month as you do to your breathing. If you don't pay attention to your breathing, you're not aware of who you are at any particular moment. With your breathing, the same thing's going to happen with your checking account, and both of them are relevant for the same reason. Same reason. The purpose for paying attention to your breathing or your posture, the way you speak to people or listen to people, is because that's how you learn. That's how you find out about yourself. That makes you conscious of your role in the world. It cuts away some of the illusions. If you're just sitting there breathing, you're cutting away some of the illusions. If you're paying attention to your breath, it's very hard to be thinking about making a lot of money and gambling in Reno. You've got to simply think about, how am I connected to the air and what systems in me work. The same is true with money and finance. By paying attention to it, you learn what's really happening. Invariably, I'll have people come to me with their financial problems, or I'm just saying myself. I work with many financial advisors, and someone will come to them, a client, and say, I'm a mess. I can't pay my bills. I need to borrow a lot of money to consolidate my loans, and I really am in a job I can't stand. I want to know how much money I need to save so I can quit. That would be a typical statement. First thing we do, it would be to find out what they roughly think their financial condition is. What do they think their income and their expenses are? And then invariably we have them actually put their financial statement together, keep a budget for a month, put together the records as best they can. And I'd say when they finally look at their budget and able to understand it, that's as close as most people are ever going to get to enlightenment. They see what they've been doing for months or years. They see what choices they've been making without thinking about it or being conscious of it.
We've had other guests on from other disciplines that have suggested that you are what you eat, and they do the same thing with the food intake to really figure out who you are. Just write down everything that goes into your system over any given period of time. And I guess the same applies.
Mm-hmm.
7 laws of money. Let's see if we can't go through the 7 laws of money and spend some time on each point exploring not only what the law is, but how it works.
Well, let me first start by saying this book is about 11 years old, and the sales, it came out in 1974, and my co-author was Sally Raspberry. The book has been selling more and more each year, so there's whatever it carries is word of mouth, and after 11 years when you ask an author about a book, it's pretty detached. So what I would say its role in society has been, and it seems to be the only book even to this day that deals with the issues that I dealt with in that book, is to suggest that money is an absolutely real thing, not in the sense of dollar bills or checks. Those are nonsense. I mean, they change their design. You go across the border and you get some new designs. You change countries and you get new laws on checks and how to cash them and how to keep records. But it's a real thing in the sense that it's measuring what people do. It's just, in the studio here we've got clocks on the wall. Now on the one hand, a clock is an absolute fiction. It's nonsense. I mean, that clock does not tell me where the sun is. This time of the year, it's probably not far off. It's probably about 5 or 6 minutes off from where the real sun is. Well, in fact, until daylight savings time, it's an hour off, an hour and a few minutes. But because it's an agreed upon convention, it's an extremely real thing. When somebody is 5 minutes late, there's a degree of discomfort, especially if it's something important, between the people. Not because the clock has a direct connection to human beings, but because it's an agreed relationship between people. It's what makes our lives work and function. And instead of doing what most people, when they talk about money, do, which is to sort of teach you that there are 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, and maybe teach you the history of clocks, which is nonsense. I mean, it's interesting, but it has nothing to do with what the clock is. The clock is an agreed upon convention that makes it possible for people to work together. And what we said in the 7 Laws of Money is that money is an agreed upon convention that people have created that allows us to work together. The second law is that it has its rules. The third law is it's a dream. And the fourth law is it's a nightmare. And I'll come back to what the first law is. But just comparing it to a clock, it has its rules. It's a dream in the same sense that a clock is a dream. A clock does not even have to be closely related to the sun to be useful. In fact, it isn't. Early clocks used to be set at sunrise. Only a century ago, all clocks were set at sunrise, and they were kept accurate during the day. The clock is an agreed-upon fiction. It's also a nightmare, because if you don't pay attention to the fiction, there are severe consequences. Other people have a way of judging you. Now let's go back to the first law. The first law of money probably should have been the last law, but in order to be interesting, it was put first. The first law of money in the book is do it, and if you're doing the right thing, the money will follow. Very simple statement. It's one that when people read it, they invariably, thousands of people have come up to me and said, "Hi, it's a wonderful law. Thank you so much." And it's the person that comes to me says, "I loved your book. The second law got to me that I know is going to be effective." Finding out, the first law says that, first of all, you have to know who you are in order to function in the society. At least to function in a way that the society will respond to you. Let's take the word respond to you and focus on that. The society has, in the United States, 90,000 roles that 90 million roles that call jobs. 90 million roles that you can conform to, and you will be given an appropriate care. The society has a rule. You do what you're supposed to do, and you'll get one of those 90 million roles. But society's not responding to you. You're a piece of clay or putty or whatever it is. It falls into that notch, and as long as you meet whatever those minimum expectations are, you'll be given the minimum rewards of that society. What I'm saying here is the society, because it's dynamic and is constantly changing, and because it's created an awful lot of us that don't quite fit into those roles, the society will respond to you if you have a very clear self-image. If you know who you are, what you're to do, then the surprising thing is the society will find room for you, will create room for you. It will literally say, okay, we've got 90 million notches, you don't fit into it, but we can create another million notches or more for people who are somehow or other important to the society. And importance can be judged in any level. It can be a rock drummer, it can be a forest ranger, it can be Johnny Appleseed. The society will respond to those people, and that's what the first law is about. Nobody needs to write a book, or least of all me, to say that if you do well in school, be average, and your teachers think you're polite, and you don't go to jail before you're 21, that you will probably get a job that'll pay you the average wage, especially if you're white, certainly if you're a male. Why write a book like that? Those are the rules already. What this book is about is saying, well, what if I don't know that I want one of those 90 million jobs? Or what if I want a small segment of those 90 million jobs? And maybe I don't even know what they want. How do I learn those things? Well, in some of those 90 million jobs, they actually want someone with the drive and interest and focus. But you've got to be so clear that they can find you, because you can't go out and find them. And that's what the first law of money is about, is finding out who you are, what you want to do, and making sure you have the drive and the appropriate skills and talents that go with it.
Back to rule number 1, and we've dwelt on it a lot. Let's dwell on it a little bit longer. You have a good sense of yourself. You do that by good breathing techniques, and you've established who you are, and you come up with something that you believe to be really right with you. You are someone that can identify the scents of different flowers. Okay, I'm taking an unusual kind of skills, right? Okay, and they're real people that have that. That's their special thing, and it's one of those extra million jobs that has to be created. It doesn't fit exactly in the 90 million, and there are fragrance companies that you can work for. Well, all the flower smellers positions happen to be filled up in the area where you live, and you're only yourself if you stay here in Northern California. You've tried Southern California and Europe, and it doesn't work out, and this is where you got to be. You still, by realizing what's right for you, may not fit into the economic system.
Okay, that's perfect, because the advice that led me to first write this book was an answer to the typical question. Someone would come to me, and they would be highly qualified. They wonderful ability to smell, sensitivity to flowers and scents, and they could connect them. And they'd come to me and say, I need $20,000 before I can get started in this business, or $5,000 or X dollars. And the first law of money was written to say, no, you have put a barrier in front of yourself that is not tangible in the world. That if you are exactly what you say you are, just start doing it. That's the first law. Start doing it. Find some way to do it. You may have to find a way to cover your expenses, food and lodging, but even in this society, that's not very hard. Maybe you have to work 2 days a week as a temporary, but that leaves you 5 days and 7 nights to do the work. Just start doing it. Start preparing the scents. Start giving classes. Start advising and consulting people. Do it. Don't get a job to save up the money to do it. And that's what the first law of money was about. It was saying, no, you don't need a budget. No, you don't need to save money. What you need to do is go in and start doing this thing that's important to you, and don't put money in front of you as a barrier.
That's a huge hurdle for people, though, isn't it? I mean, I've seen hundreds of individuals who have come forward with proposals that are doing one thing now to get them by until they can save X number of dollars to do what they really want to do, what's really right for them.
And you earlier talked about the tragedies of money. That is the major tragedy, is that they're wasting their time, what time they have, on something that may not be relevant to what they're learning, that makes them uncomfortable, and in fact the money is not going to prepare them for what they want to do. The best way to put it is, and many people I've known who've saved up a lot of money to buy or build a sailboat, to promptly find that it sinks, because if they'd spent the same number of years, say, being a crew member, they would have learned the necessary complexities of the sea and sailing. Money doesn't buy you the skills of a sailor.
Mm-hmm. Another thing in society that we see so often is that people save their entire lives, and they work and work and work so that they can go to Africa or Asia or Europe or wherever it is that they want to go, some really exotic place, and they're just going to spend out all this happiness. And by the time they get to go, they're too old to really be able to do all the things that
That's true.
attracted them in the beginning.
That's true. I was on a cruise ship, and we used to joke about it, since most of the people on the cruise ship were quite old, that when we pulled into port, there were more ambulances than there were taxis.
Oh,
it was. I
guess it's not funny, but it is in a way.
Well, that's what led to the third book. But go ahead.
Okay, let's talk about rules number 5 and 6. You can never really give money away. You can never really receive money as a gift. A lot of folks listening right now that are waiting for someone to give them a huge gift of money.
The book was written because I was president of a foundation. Also had been a banker. and a community organizer. And I was invariably dealt with people coming to me with a whole range of barriers to doing something useful or constructive. As I said, the first barrier was, I have to save up this money till I can do it. The barriers that were 5 and 6 were, I know what I'm doing would be supported by a foundation, so I have to get the grants from the foundations. It was frustrating. Not only was I, of course, in the position to give grants, but I watched all of the people who were waiting for grants, the people who got grants, and over a number of years I got to see the effect of that mentality. And it was rather pathetic. Now people come to me and ask for me to help them get a grant, and I politely tell them that I'm sorry for them, that they have to get a grant, but I certainly can't help. That it would be like getting cigarettes for someone if I thought cigarette smoking was harmful. I wouldn't help someone to get a grant. It's harmful. What I found in foundation work is what we, as the donors, would look for someone who was doing something we were interested in. And then we give them the money. And that worked. We did not wait for proposals for someone to do something or to propose to do something that might be of interest to us. But there was a simple reason. We found that when you look at things that are being done in the world, the people who are doing them are doing them. We may want to help them and may want to support them, but they have to have the drive and the determination to go through it, whether they get our money or not. And we found that our grants were effective when they were given to people who were already doing it. Not to say that they were particularly effective, because money isn't particularly effective. If you give me 4 loyal people who can work with me as a team, and this has happened before, it's worth about $1 million a year. I can do more with 4 loyal, dedicated people who work together as a team than I can ever do with $1 million. And foundations know that. They're looking for those people who are working together, who've got strong, clear ideas of what they're doing and values that are consistent with what they're doing. That's where they put their money. So you're applying for a grant. You're absolutely on the wrong end of the spectrum. What you need to do is proceed to do what's important, and the foundations will hear about you very, very quickly. I can remember one character in New York who was doing undoubtedly the most outrageous thing I've ever heard. It took him 1 month. It took me 1 month to find out about him, simply because someone else knew that the two of us should be connected. His name was Gerard O'Neill. He was a physics professor at Princeton, and he was teaching a class on building sort of villages in space. And this was in 1971. And he was teaching a class and calculating how you'd build a village out in space using materials from the moon. Absolutely preposterous at the time. And somebody heard about him, and they promptly phoned me and said that he would be in San Francisco working on some physics problem. And the two of us should meet. We met. I instantly said, yes, that's the project I've been interested in myself now for several months. And I gave him the money and helped him get started. He already had a class. What he needed to do next was to be able to find some of the other people who were his supporters. That's the way foundations work. He was already doing it. They knew who in the foundation world, in this case me, was interested in that material, that subject. So they put us together.
What about the individual who is not seeking a foundation grant or any kind of money, that all of a sudden, whammo, here it comes? It doesn't happen very often. It's a dream to a lot of people, but it does happen occasionally to individuals who are discovered without even seeking to be discovered. The individual that's on Skid Row that finds that his great uncle died and left him several $1 million, and all of a sudden he's got all this money. Do you have...
It's usually a tragedy. In a few rare cases, it's not. I've worked with every possible kind of financial problem. I've worked with people who've embezzled money and people who've inherited astronomical sums and didn't know it was going to happen. People who've inherited money that's sitting and waiting until it's in a trust fund and until they turn 50 years old, and they're 18 now. I've looked at all these problems, and the best material I have on that subject came from the Wall Street Journal. They went back and looked at there was a television program in the late 50s called the $64,000 question. They went back and they checked on the winners to this $64,000 question to see what happened to the people who won big amounts of money. And the answer is very simple and was absolutely conclusive. People who knew who they were and were already doing what they wanted took the money and added it to what they were doing. People who had no focus in life, didn't know who they were, literally went downhill. I'll give you an example of both. The worst case was the man who knew everything about opera. He was a janitor in St. Louis. He won at least $120,000. He died not too long after the Wall Street Journal checked on him 12 years later. He's never able to get a job in either opera or back in janitorial work. He slowly went through all of his money. He didn't know what to do with it. He had information on opera. He had no skills relevant to it. And nobody wanted a janitor that was this much of an ego problem. He had locked himself out of both fields. Mm-hmm. And he became a Skid Row bum in southern Illinois. On the other hand was a man who was a jockey who had a business selling antiques. And he took the money and just increased his antique inventory and continued to live the same life he'd always led. It was Jimmy Pearson. I don't remember the exact name, but he has an antique store in San Francisco. He'd been a famous jockey. Didn't phase his life at all. He was a fully developed, clear person, and it was just added to his inventory. Another person who fit into that category, who won the money, later said the money allowed her to finish graduate school 1 year earlier, and she won quite a bit of money. What she meant by that was that she just used the money to support her husband, who was going to medical school. So she didn't have to work at all, and she would have finished getting her PhD in psychology in 2 years. She was able to do it in less than 1 year with all the money, and her name was Joyce Brothers. She had a very clear idea who she was back in those days, and she proceeded to do, of course, what she wanted to do, and she's still doing it. The point of this is that the money does not make life any easier. It makes it harder if you don't know who you are. And if you already know who you are, it literally just makes for a bigger inventory and has very little other effect.
The seventh law of money. There are worlds without money. What does that mean?
That comes from French. It's added on to the end of all PhD theses, and it's simply to remind people that money simultaneously pervades our entire life because it's part of our relationships with other people. But on the other hand, the seventh law says that there are whole worlds without money, like dancing and singing, that you can sit on the beach and sing and dance with your family, and money is not in that domain at all, or with your friends. That you can look at the world and say everything in the world is money, but you can also look at it and say, my goodness, there are all the domains of dancing, singing, joy, walking that have nothing to do with money. And it's a contrast to remind the readers who are reading a book about money that much of the world, if not all of it, is in fact outside the domain of money.
I think we scratched the surface. I hope you'll come back and visit with us again. This is Infinity. Remember to keep your mind open and listen to your heart. I'm Charlie Seraphin. Thank you for listening.